Hi everybody, welcome to our year-end wrap-up of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Joining us later in the show will be Lincoln Schertz and Adam Troop from the Utah Association of Counties. Rather than do a lot of philosophizing about the great stories of the year or the most important ones, we're just going to kind of recap them very quickly and point towards the next year. Let's start with the most recent, Medicaid expansion. As I was reading through what was entailed in this waiver and what it said it would cover, I was surprised. There were a lot of things I would not have anticipated being a coverable Medicaid expense. How broad is this, Dr. Shiozawa?
It's broad in the sense that it is directed to a specific population. When we think of Medicaid, in one sense we say, well, it's going to help those people who are poor, like say a woman who is pregnant or someone who has children, and they can just get general coverage. But what this waiver does is specifically focused on a specific population, those people who are in the homeless situation, who have drug problems, who have mental health problems, and who have problems with the justice system. And so when they're involved in that, whether it's through the judicial system, the mental health courts, or how they find their way into that particular category, then these dollars then are focused to specific treatments to help them. Let's say consider like substance abuse, maybe putting them into either outpatient or inpatient treatment programs. The residential treatment program, Odyssey House and other groups are now going to get funding for many, many beds that they didn't have before to bring these patients in so they don't go directly from the jail back onto the street or from mental health courts out into some hotel with an ankle bracelet, but rather into a treatment program that can give them not only treatment, whether it's physical treatment, medical assisted treatment, counseling, and then also getting them back into better health and maybe even into a job. So really stabilizing care.
It talked about residential treatment beds and jail beds and making sure that there are expanded or capable facilities within the jail. And I noticed even some kind of elements of police training. So how does that kind of fit into that mix? Are they all crucial elements to make this work?
It's going to be hard to have this program succeed, first of all, until we know really how it's going to work. But without enforcement down in, say, downtown, the Rio Grande area to protect not only those people who are homeless, but the citizens around them, and to prevent that vulnerable population from being preyed upon by the drug dealers, we're going to have more police. And then for those people who really are drug abusers or who have violated the law, then they have to go in to jail. And then we have to have, under the JRI, for example, the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, we have to have funding for that, which we didn't get before because we never expanded Medicaid. And then to get them from there into residential treatment or outpatient treatment into programs. All three of these various factors are important. So when you look at the judicial system, what's it supposed to accomplish? Well, public safety, right? Accountability.
Yes.
And rehabilitation. And if you take away one of those three aspects, you're going to have a failure in that system. And we have to have that rehabilitation. We've been pretty good with accountability, and we're pretty good with public safety. Now let's get into the rehabilitation portion.
So there you have our first topic, Medicaid expansion. So to talk about the importance and relevance to the counties, we have Adam Troop, who is the CEO of the Utah Association of Counties, their legislative director or director of legislative affairs, Lincoln Schertz.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
All right. Why was Medicaid expansion such a big deal this year?
Well, it was a long-fought effort, a very complex effort of trying to get a state proposal through the federal government to try to address specific needs that had been identified in our state to deal with people who have substance use disorders and mental health issues who are involved in the criminal justice system or who are trying to avoid involvement in the criminal justice system. And by making the expansion possible that was made and was approved by the federal government, we have created the opportunity for many more people to get the treatment and medical care that they do need.
Well, and trying to contextualize the politics of all of this, right? I mean, at the same time we're trying to get expansion through in the state of Utah to cover this JRI population, you had the Trump administration who was trying to pull back the Affordable Care Act. And so navigating those politics has been not easy for the Speaker and for Representative Dunnigan, who did an amazing job of getting the Trump administration to approve this waiver, which many thought was going to be unaccomplishable with the current political dynamic around ACA.
And yet just a year ago you had an administration that was very willing and a state legislature that's going, wait, hold on.
And an administration 18 months ago who took 18 months and did nothing with the waiver. So pretty interesting times.
Correct, and it gave the state of Utah the opportunity to say, this is what we would like to have in place in our state. And now the administration was able to say, okay, show us if it works. We'll give you that leeway, and let's see if that works and meets the needs you have in your state.
Yeah, a great win for states' rights if you are of that ilk.
There you go. That's a good way to end the first segment. We'll be back. Our next question, our next topic for importance, opioids and lawsuits. We'll be back on the county seat in just a minute.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
It's one more, here we go again. I tell myself I'm not in love, but one more time is not enough. One last kiss and then you were gone, and I'm here wishing you could stay a little longer. Stay a little longer. Wishing you could stay a little longer.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
Welcome back to the county seat, our year-end review. You know, of the things that caught most attention, there are several problems that are all tied into one base problem, and that is the explosion of opioid abuse in all forms. We decided that that was one of our top stories of the year, and we were going to talk about a recent phenomenon of taking on the drug companies that started this problem.
Yeah, it's completely different. The paradigm has completely changed. You know, people think of drugs, they think of the dirty side of town. And what we're seeing, that's not necessarily the case anymore. It used to be, you know, the drugs that come in a baggie. What about the drugs that come in a bottle? Because you can't divorce the two. We're literally seeing soccer moms, clergy, businessmen, high school kids, grade school kids getting hooked on opioids quietly at home, not talking about it because they don't want to deal with the stigma of shame that may come with that, quietly dying at home. Something I've never seen before. That's how pervasive this is. That's the difference now. We're no longer dealing with the seedy side of town. We're dealing with home.
Commissioner Lee, talk to me for a minute about what Utah County has done, because you kind of are the headline maker as far as what's happening with this. And I was very surprised but gratified when I read the headline.
Yes, you know, in looking at this is not something kind of behind the scenes, as mentioned here. These are faces that we see. We all know them. It's in our neighborhoods, it's in our families, it's there all the time, and we're not going to just duck away from this. As an elected responsibility to take a sworn oath to protect and defend, and that is the citizens of our county as well. And as we look at that in a realistic manner, we have to stand up to some of these issues and say, here we are, we're going to make a stand on it. It's not something we're just going to hide behind and say, well, maybe some other day. We have, you know, these false marketing messages, and I want to just kind of jump to that really quick. That they're saying out here that opioids are safe and effective, and they treat chronic and non-cancer pain. They also say that the existence of scientific evidence that opioids are effective for long-term use. You know, it's a narrative that is not correct. And as elected officials, and as we're looking at this, it doesn't just affect the people. We have it within our sheriff's department. When we're looking at down at the jail, we deal with it on a regular basis. Our Wasatch mental health issues, the drug and alcohol abuse, all the substances that we're trying to alleviate, they're there constantly. It affects the county on its bottom line with the budgeting, because we have to go after and deal with these issues. They're in their emergency rooms. We have every day more than 1,000 people treated in the emergency rooms for misuse of prescription drugs. Not for the proper use, but the misuse of prescription drugs. These need to be addressed. We're not necessarily going out there and saying, that we want to have everybody always feel pain all the time, but it's the misuse and then the leading as it gets into the drug abuses and the drug overdoses that are a big concern for us. And we have that standing in the county where we're directly affected by that, and so we're leading out and saying we need to pursue legal actions to turn the tide of this, or to at least address it.
So let's take a shot at the opioids in the lawsuit. On first blush, just suing opioid companies just seems like I want to blame somebody, but I guess there's a rationale to this.
There definitely is, and again, I'm not going to try to go into the proof of all the legal case right now, but the fact is that there are facts and there are theories by the counties across the country that have brought these lawsuits that are essentially akin to the tobacco lawsuits from years ago, and based on many of the same kinds of claims, and that is that a manufacturer of a product misled the public and misled individuals to believe that this was a good thing to use and that it was not addictive and that there were no significant health problems that you'd face. And as a result of that, many people followed the advice from the makers and from their doctors, and that is how we end up in the situation we're in now. Now, in the long run, does that play out so that counties can recover money for the cost of services they provided as a result of those situations? We don't know, but there is certainly a claim that is justified, and so we will see what happens. And I'm hopeful that counties will join in to figure out whether or not they do have an interest in continuing.
Does this open up a floodgate for individuals to pursue the same line in some kind of class action?
I think there's likelihood to be a class action lawsuit. The question is jurisdiction, right? Is this going to be handled in state court, or is this going to be handled in federal court? And by Utah counties coming forward and putting forward claims, the hope is that it will be handled in state court versus a federal class action case. And so that's part of the reason and the logic behind doing something here locally, is you can have more control through the state court process than you would otherwise have through a federal court process.
And again, this is an issue of local governments, local interests. Let's find out what the facts show. Let's find out as we move forward whether there is a claim or if people are just trying to find someone to blame.
And no question, this epidemic has plagued the budgets of counties and others as we provide services to try and remedy what's going on.
I.e. Medicaid expansion.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with the county seat with our next topic.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
The Layton Hills Mall offers more than just shopping. Bring the whole family and enjoy SeaQuest Interactive Aquarium to feed the fish and exotic birds, hold live reptiles, and even swim with the stingrays. Or pump up the action and visit Dartside, Utah's premier soft foam dart tag arena. And don't forget the Great Room Escape, where you can challenge your friends to solving mysteries inside themed rooms. So come and experience great fun at the Layton Hills Mall and visit playindavis.com for other great activities.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're continuing our review of the most important stories of the year. Perhaps the one that has gotten the most airtime, the most editorial time, the most coverage time was the declaration of the Bears Ears National Monument. Now, from the time the year started to the time that it ended, there were many things that have happened, and it's happened in an incredibly short period of time. Now, of course, our conversation is focused on reduction of the monument, but let's look back and remember what the conflict was before the monument.
Now that the Bears Ears National Monument is a reality, there are many questions San Juan County residents have about what to expect in the years to come. While no one knows exactly, there is a 20-year case study that we can examine: the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. 20 years ago, Claire Ramsey was a Garfield County Commissioner. We asked him what they promised the day after that declaration.
Well, that everything would remain the same, that we wouldn't lose any rights or privileges that we had at that time. And of course, everything changed immediately.
A way of life, a culture has changed, access has changed. The things that we were building and the things that we were preserving have been taken away or starting to be destroyed because of the monument.
4 main areas of local community impact came into play with the creation of the Grand Staircase: transportation, grazing, water, and use of resources all have changed.
But the roads were a big issue. We began immediately fighting over them. In fact, it was from the pressure from Garfield County commissioners that forced the monument people to even put roads into their monument management plan.
To date, Garfield County reports they have lost nearly 50% of the county road miles within the monument. For Kane County, the loss is worse.
I actually did a count in the beginning, and we basically have lost 80% of our roads that we've claimed as county roads.
For decades, people have relied on resources in the surrounding hills for the things they need. Those resources are now off limits as well.
As I remember, there was about 2 areas on the monument you could still gather wood. And so that was affected directly and immediately. There's areas there that people mined decorative rocks, flat rocks, you know, for patios and such, and those things were shut down.
Kane County is no longer allowed to use gravel from inside the monument to maintain roads, and Escalante City had to abandon a nearby source for clay to line their landfill.
It was determined no material could be taken off the monument, so Escalante City had to find another clay source. It cost them a significant amount of money to haul that new clay source to Escalante.
Perhaps the biggest impact is in grazing, the one thing that was specifically promised to remain.
They will tell you that our AUMs have not been cut, and that is true. But can we run the same number of AUMs on our allotments? No, we can't, because of the infestation of pinyon and juniper, of weeds. The physical conditions on the monument are deteriorating due to neglect.
Residents in Garfield and Kane counties feel that the promises to work in conjunction with the communities failed to materialize, and the special concessions listed in the proclamation have been circumvented. It is their fear that the same awaits their neighbors to the east. From the county seat, I'm Malia Stringham.
Okay, Bears Ears, probably, as far as headlines go, the biggest headline grabber of the entire year here in the state of Utah and in the region as well. So why does this whole controversy end up being so important to rural counties?
It's important to rural counties because there has been a feeling from leadership in those counties, from citizens in those counties, that they were not heard in the past by the administration for years, and in fact that they felt that now they were, as a result of Interior Secretary Zinke coming down to the area and talking to people about Bears Ears and Grand Staircase, that they were now being heard and they had a voice with their federal government and with the leadership. I think that's the biggest reason that it is important to rural counties. The reality is the change and the impact on the land that's there from the change is not that significant, despite the claims that the land is being sold or given away to the highest bidder, which is dishonest. The fact is that what we still have is protected federal lands with more access provided. So those two reasons, I think, are important, but the biggest one is the feeling that people in small communities, small population communities, are heard by the administration.
Is there really a big philosophical difference of the protection stance of a monument versus multiple use of regular BLM land? Does that really pay out in day-to-day life?
Not in day-to-day life. There is a philosophical difference, right? Monument status versus multiple use status. It's much more controlled, more limited as a monument. But the reality is, if we look at how we are able to access public lands for multiple uses, especially for any resource extraction, there is no question it's still extremely burdensome. It's still extremely difficult.
Heavily regulated. I mean, it's the fear-mongering out there that this was all of a sudden going to become private land for development is just a fallacy to gen up the opposition versus recognizing still public land, still highly regulated, and still going to be there for the public use.
But it is going to improve, like, grazing problems
Absolutely.
and restrictions and a little bit of some of the transportation issues. That will have an impact, right?
Certainly, I think it will. I think that's the hope for many people who live in those rural communities, no question about it, and that would be a positive on a lot of levels. And on the flip side of that, the fact that there was monument protection didn't mean that the federal government was putting a lot more time and money and staff into making sure the land was properly taken care of. It simply meant it had a different designation and people's uses were limited more. That is not going to change. The lack of staffing doesn't change no matter what the status is. So.
Okay, very good. Well, we'll be on to our final topic right after this break.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon Country.
Welcome back to the county seat. We have been going through the half hour looking at the most important issues of the year, and we are going to take a look at the last one, which we already know is going to be an issue again this year. It's medical marijuana. This has gone through a lot of iterations and has been a dialogue that probably has no end in Utah until we come to a final settlement of how to deal with it. Let's check it out. The marijuana plant is made up of over 100 individual cannabinoids. The primary ones are cannabidiols, CBD, and tetrahydrocannabiniols, or THC. This one is the one that has psychotropic qualities. According to the National Institute of Health, the human body also produces its own cannabinoid chemicals. Currently, there is medical interest in THC and CDB. THC is proven to increase appetite and reduce nausea. The FDA-approved THC-based medications are used for these purposes. THC may also decrease pain, inflammation, and muscle control problems, but it does have potentially harmful side effects. CBD is a cannabinoid that does not affect the mind or behavior, but preliminary research indicates that it may be useful in reducing pain and inflammation, controlling epileptic seizures, and possibly even treating mental illness and addictions. Other areas that show promise are in attacking certain cancers and tumors, including brain tumors, combating autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis, and Alzheimer's disease. So we've come quite a bit of distance on medical marijuana. It's been discussed every year for years. And what's changing? How did this year end up different than last year and the year before on the issue?
I think you'd have to look at public sentiment as the main driver of why things have changed. In Utah, I don't know if I would have thought 5 years ago that it would be polling at 60, 70% approval rating in terms of medical marijuana, and that's where things are at today. And so when you see the public sentiment change, you've seen literally every surrounding state adopt either recreational or medical marijuana. I think the dynamics around the entire issue have begun to change. The Citizens Initiative that's going to likely make its way to the ballot certainly changes the dynamic of the discussion. It'll be fascinating to see how the legislature responds to that. Recognizing you've got this initiative out here hanging that is polling at 70%, the public is going to vote for it unless they do something. So how much preemption can the state legislature do to really keep control of this issue versus how much is going to be done by initiative will be the issue du jour for much of the legislature.
Do you think the legislature will be as motivated by this as they were by Count My Vote?
They are going to be motivated. What's also interesting is you've got Senator Shizawa, who was the leader of much of this conversation about how do we handle this and how do we handle it in a scientific and medically appropriate way, has now resigned from the legislature to take a position with HHS, Health and Human Services federally. So with his absence, who's going to fill the vacuum in terms of the policy discussion? Senator Madsen's no longer in the legislature, so a lot of space to fill.
Senator Vickers is all that's left, I guess.
Senator Vickers, who's a pharmacist by trade, is there and certainly has a perspective on this issue as a licensed pharmacist in the state. And like I said, there's a lot of space to fill in terms of the politics. It'll be fascinating to watch this one play out during the session.
You think people really understand what the initiative's about, or do you think it's just popular sentiment?
Heavens no. It's largely based on the Madsen bill from, what was that, 2-3 years ago? I would argue very few people have actually read the initiative to see what it contains.
Well, okay, that's the top 4 stories. Guys, thanks for joining us. Happy New Year to you.
Absolutely.
It's just around the corner. Will you come back in a couple of weeks and talk about the legislature?
We'll look a little more tired, but we will be back after the legislature concludes.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Happy New Year, everybody. We'll see you next year on the county seat.